Hi, I'm Garry McCarthy, and this is Behind the Badge. This is our second episode, and I'm very excited tonight. We've got a very good friend of mine, Charlie Beck. Charlie is a storied policeman. Some of the stories are good, some of the stories
Some not so
aren't.
good. Yeah,
Some of them
true.
aren't so good, but I'm kidding. Charlie was the chief of the Los Angeles Police Department, went up through the department, held virtually every job in the department that you could probably think of. And I'll let Charlie tell you about himself a little bit, and then we'll start talking about some of the topics that we want to cover tonight.
It's fantastic, Gary, and thanks for having me here.
Thanks for coming.
Beautiful day in Chicago. A little cold, but I'll get through it.
It's always cold here if you're from
If you're from
California.
I found that out. So I was born into a police family. My dad became a Los Angeles police officer in 1950, and he rose through the ranks. Worked a lot of different jobs, and eventually became the number 2 for the department, which was an assistant chief. He retired in 1980. So I got interested in policing at an early age, but I didn't know if that was really what I would like to do, right? I had illusions of being a professional athlete like you, and I was deterred for the same reasons you were. I just didn't have enough physical ability.
We weren't good enough.
We weren't good enough, that's exactly right. So I decided that I would look into policing, and I eventually became a police reserve officer in Los Angeles in 1975. And I did that for a couple of years in Rampart Division, found out that I loved the profession, and I loved being outside. I love affecting people in a positive way and protecting others, and graduated from the academy in 1977 as a regular police officer. Went to Rampart Division, one of the busiest divisions in the city at the time, did my probation there and became a gang officer in South Los Angeles, and that's where I spent the majority of my field time, was in gang assignments in the south end of the city of Los Angeles. I was a gang officer, I was a gang sergeant, I was a lieutenant in charge of gangs.
Gang member?
No, never a gang member, although I was accused several times in court. but no. And so worked my way through the ranks, as you said, eventually becoming a sergeant in the right in the aftermath of the '84 Olympics. Right? '84 Olympics was a huge high water mark for Los Angeles. And funny story, so I'm a police officer working in Hollywood right before the '84 Olympics. The department's mandate was to clean up the street prostitution in Hollywood Division, so we were diligent in doing that. And that required making a lot of arrests of women that were working the streets, or the pimps that controlled them. And in the process of the booking operations of a woman I'd arrested for prostitution, I saw this beautiful deputy on the receiving end when I was giving swapping handcuffs, and they were taking my female arrestee into jail. And I was struck by how gorgeous she was, but I was kind of tongue-tied. I was always shy to make advances to somebody in uniform when I was in uniform, because it was inappropriate from my point of view. Anyway, the girl that I was in the process of booking and had just arrested looks at this beautiful deputy and says, "You know, you two make a really cute couple. You guys ought to go out." And my future wife looked at her and said, "What are you? He just arrested you. Why would you recommend him to go on a date with me?" And she said, "Well, he was really nice, really a very nice guy." And so eventually, that's the way things worked out. We did go out, and I've been married for almost 40 years now.
Wow.
Crazy, right? So
you could have been out by now.
I could have been out by now. So became a sergeant right after the Olympics. Worked a bunch of field assignments, a couple of very interesting ones. I was a gang sergeant, which kind of continued the path that I'd been on. But then I got, because of my narcotics expertise, I got accepted into our very first internal surveillance detail, which was felony arrests of police officers that were involved primarily in narcotics, because this was in the late 80s. You know, cocaine was rampant
Yeah.
in Los
Same
Angeles.
thing in New York.
Same thing in New York.
Yeah.
And a lot of cops got mixed up in it, unfortunately,
Yeah.
very sadly. So, you know, as a sergeant working that detail, I had the misfortune, but the duty of arresting a number of cops for some pretty significant crimes. And that kind of changed the way I thought about policing, in that I recognized, I think more astutely than I could have in any other way, that integrity was everything.
Sure.
That you know, it didn't just matter that you did the job, but you had to do it the right way. And so that kind of moved the needle on how I thought about policing. And so I continued through the ranks, and eventually became the chief of detectives after being in charge of a couple of different districts, just as you were in New York.
Which is when we met.
Right.
I was in Newark, and you were the chief of detectives.
Yes.
And I was looking for some help trying to figure out this whole gang thing.
Yes.
That was new to me. And that strategy that we put together here in Chicago that I talked about on episode 1
Yeah, I saw
actually
that.
came straight from Charlie. As far as once the shooting happens, we're thinking about what happens next.
Then the real work begins, right? Because it's really tough to stop that first shooting, the first shooting in a series, because it's based on, although it's becoming easier because of social media, because if, you know, I just talked about this earlier today at a class I teach for the University of Chicago's Police Leadership Academy. And, you know, social media is becoming the new graffiti. But when I was a gang cop, we would go out and look for new graffiti every day.
Yeah.
Because that was the indicator of where, you know, violence followed graffiti. You start crossing out the other set's names and all that stuff, and people died. Now, in the digital world, you know, that this all occurs online, and so now good street cops are guided by that kind of social media insult.
Yeah, it's great intel.
That eventually ends in homicide. So, you know,
Charlie, I'm sitting here and I'm struck by something. You know, I'm from the Bronx, New York, right? You're from California, LA, and the parallels are incredible.
yes.
You know, we're both Yankee fans, right? Right?
Well, you know what?
I'm going to put this out there so you can just take advantage, get it over with.
Okay.
The fact is, last year the Dodgers destroyed the Yankees, although the Yankees kind of destroyed themselves. But, you know, I've been shot at. I've been in riots. I've been in hurricanes. I've been in so many different situations. 9/11, got caught in both collapses. That World Series is putting me into counseling. I got to tell you.
I have to.
Thank God it wasn't Ohtani. It was Freddie.
So, you know, again, we share the common joy and pain of our lives, right? So when I was chief, was the World Series between the cheating Houston Astros.
Oh, yeah.
And
They cheated against the
and
Yankees,
the
too.
noble LA Dodgers.
Noble.
and the final game, it is like 110 degrees in Los Angeles, and you know, it was, if you remember, the series was tied.
I stopped watching once the cheating Houston Astros beat my beloved Yankees.
Yes, and then the Dodgers collapsed, the Astros won, and I had to listen to Art Acevedo's because we'd made, just as you and I would do, we made, you know, these little wagers.
Sure.
And so I think I had to send Art Langer's Deli. I can't remember exactly what the bet was, but I had to pay him, which was very
Listening
traumatic.
to Art in the first place.
Very
is
traumatic. Very traumatic.
I got PTSD from it.
Just talking about it. So back to gang strategy. So because I don't think people really are interested in this part of it. But you know, Chicago and Los Angeles are the birthplace of American gangs. I mean, that's if you go, for some reason, these two, well, not for some reason, for a multitude of reasons, these two cities birth gangs that go internationally. You know, Crips, Bloods, MS-13, 18th Street, all of these are products of Los Angeles that have spread throughout the world. And,
Sure.
so we learned a lot about policing them just from our failures.
Right.
And so when you talk to me, because New York is very different. It's much
Totally.
more.
It's about the narcotics.
It's about dope. Well, you know, and while in Chicago and in LA, it's about territory.
Yeah, and it's
dope-
generational.
Yes. And dope is just a means of funding.
Correct.
Right. So it's very, very different. And so when you called and we started talking about stopping the next shooting, and you know, trying to get community support for reducing violence in gangs, because a lot of it is about prestige within their neighborhood that they grew up in,
Yeah.
right? So they, you know, there's no cops in the neighborhood, there's no firefighters in the neighborhood, there's just
Right.
gangsters. And so a lot of it's about turning the emotion of the community against their violence, right?
Right.
It's, I mean, it's fascinating, but it's a lot of hard work, and you did a great job while you were here. You made significant reductions, and
Well, you did the same thing in Los Angeles. You set records,
Yeah.
and you got below 300 murders, which is still a lot of murders, don't get me wrong. We're never satisfied with any murder.
no,
But Charlie set records. I think you had like 9 years. in a
9
row
years. 9 years. We had
Under 300.
We hadn't been under 300. Well, and if you do it, of course, you shouldn't do it by the total number. You should do per capita,
Right.
Because you know LA doubled in size since we were at this level before. So
Right.
it was back into the 60s, which I think is about the same time frame that you reduced Chicago's homicide rate
Yeah,
to.
in 2013 and 14.
Yeah.
When
same.
we were sharing. See, Charlie and I, what people don't know is that police chiefs across the country have a relationship through different organizations. The one that we spent the most time at was Major City Chiefs. And, you know, one of the things that we learn from each other is not just strategy, but also leadership styles.
Yes.
And I want to go back, and I'm not being facetious now, the parallels between Charlie and myself on different sides of the country is actually kind of amusing to me. His father was a World War II veteran.
Absolutely.
He was a gunner on a B-29, which is an insane way to deal with it.
And your father was a Marine.
My dad
and
was-
in the same theater.
In the same theater, correct.
In
my
the
dad's-
Pacific Theater.
My dad's combat on Iwo Jima had something to do with the B-29s coming back from Tokyo, where your dad
Getting
may
to
have,
Tokyo.
where your dad may have very well landed.
Probably cheated him at cards.
It's probably right. It's probably right. But I also come from a police family. My dad, after the war, went back to New York and became a New York City policeman. And actually, in a pretty decent career, one of the things that I'm most proud of is the fact that I wore my dad's shield when I was a police officer. Did you get that?
So I did not. Well, so to finish my family story, though, all my kids became cops. So and that gets to the badge thing. So at the time, they were less lenient about letting badges go to legacy kids. So I couldn't take this was in the LAPD of the 70s, and they were a little tight about some things. So, but as things progressed, that became much more acceptable. And so when my oldest daughter was the first to graduate from the Los Angeles Police Academy, and we had my dad's badge remade because my dad was a policeman because they didn't have police officers at the time. So we had my dad's badge number remade into a police officer's badge, and she still wears that badge to this day. Then she was followed by her brother. Her brother was in the first graduating class that I presided over as chief, and he got my badge, my police officer's badge. And then my daughter, my youngest daughter, Megan, became a sheriff's deputy. There's always one, right? Always one.
Well, your wife, too.
And so we had her mom, my wife that I met and told you the jail story about, we had her badge remade, and Megan wore that.
Yeah.
So all three of the kids wore their parents' badge.
If you haven't figured it out yet, Charlie is the real-life Tom Selleck in Blue Bloods.
Yeah.
right? His whole family of cops. My older brother was a New York State trooper. The NYPD wasn't hiring when he was ready to go, so he became a trooper. And we still have the rivalry today. I tell him that I'm out doing law enforcement, and he makes left turns on the New York State Freeway.
Tell him, everybody appreciates you having an armed AAA.
There you go. But here's something else that Charlie touched on, and just the kind of a funny story is when I was in my training for field training after the academy, I had a friend of mine from college whose father was a captain in the NYPD. And he called me and he said, Gary, my dad says that he could probably get you to whatever precinct you want to go to once you get out of your training. I said, okay, fine. So I'm finishing up my training and I call him up. I said, Howie, I want to go to the 4-6 precinct in the Bronx. He says, okay, I got a 4-6. He calls me back 20 minutes later. He says, did you say 4-6? I said, yeah, I said that. My father wants to know if you actually took the psychological exam because nobody asks to go to the 4-6. All you got to do is screw up and you end up there.
You're going to be there eventually, right?
Right? And like you said, you went to a very Rampart, you said,
Rampart,
right?
yeah.
I went to the 4-6, and years later, I joke that I have lived a Forrest Gump type existence, and you could have as much fun with that as you like. But it's almost like I don't make decisions, things just keep happening to me. And that one decision that I made, in retrospect, was the best decision I ever made in my police career. Because I never expected that I was going to run a police department.
No.
I looked at these old sergeants with white hair and cranky people.
Yeah.
And I said, wow, I don't know if I could ever do that. But if you're going to own a restaurant, you got to start by working in the kitchen. And
Right.
working in the kitchen, it gives you the calm confidence in crisis that people who don't do that first don't have.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And by the time my kids became cops, I was in a position like your captain, Rabbi.
Yeah.
That's the right term
That's
in
what-
New York,
that's
right?
we say-
That's the right term in New York. Yeah.
Or a hook.
We call them mentors.
Mentors.
Anyway, I was in that position where I could have some control over that, so I sent them all to Rampart, which was the division that I started in, and one that had a very has a great history, but then a very troubled history because it was the home of probably the greatest scandal in Los Angeles policing history, outside of Rodney King, I think. So
We had this, so I just want to get this in. We had the same experience in that we had the Mullen Commission, which was the result of a cop in Brooklyn named Michael Dowd, who was on the, if you've ever seen the show, it's called The 7-5.
yeah.
Well, thank God I didn't have a brick with me when I saw it because I would have thrown it through the TV. Because for 2 years, I went to internal affairs as a captain. And I can't believe the stupid things that police officers did and some of the real criminal things. Like if you put a gun to a drug dealer's head and say, if you don't give me the money, I'm going to blow your brains out. That's a robbery.
Yes, it is.
And guess what? I locked up a crew of about 5 of them who were working together, and I actually flipped the guy. It was quite an experience.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the whole case, the guy who was the centerpiece of it never said a word to us. But when we turned over discovery for trial, he got to see it, his lawyer got to see it. They asked for a recess. He walked across the street, resigned from the NYPD, went back to court and took a 3 to 5 for robberies, and never said a word to us. So it was interesting that thug mentality can actually infiltrate a police department like that.
Yeah, and you learn, and I think that when you talk about Forrest Gump, I think that until I'd worked those cases, I kind of had that same mentality. Hey, everything's fine. Everybody that wears this badge is my brother.
I never saw anybody do anything that could even be considered
Not even
criminal.
close. Not even close.
Stupid, yes.
I saw dumb things. I saw overly aggressive stuff, but criminal, no. And one of the cases we were working on, my partner and I, Freddie Booker. If Freddie ever sees this, God bless you. Freddie and I were assigned a uniform cop who was alleged to be planting drugs on people on the street, right? Dropping rocks in their pocket, right?
Yeah.
And so we set up a scenario where he would come upon us and initiate a stop, and he did, and planted cocaine on us, and actually started the booking process before we
Wow.
made sure he penned out the arrest report,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you go, you're throwing away, this $1 million career, $1 million career,
Yeah. Yeah.
your family,
Yep.
for what?
Yeah.
Yeah, to get a number.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, unbelievable. So, I think that is what, I know that we want to talk about leadership because, that's what we both believe in. And that's what real leadership is about.
Sure.
Is being able to say, hey, we don't do that here.
Yeah.
That's
I have absolutely no problem with the cases that I made while I was in internal
No,
affairs.
and-
A couple of them are really sad, but by the same token, no, can't do it.
Well, they're all sad because with the exception of maybe one or two of the people that I worked, which was probably in the hundreds, they didn't come into the organization to be that.
No.
There are several that we found that I believe did, but most of them were victims of being weak-minded or influenced by people that were truly evil, or just becoming too cavalier about their authority, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a real eye opener, and
Yeah.
one of the reasons why, I told you I do this thing for University of Chicago, this Police Leadership Academy, and it's a group of captains or commanders, whatever the rank is, that runs a precinct or an area or a division, whatever you call it, geographic district, yeah. Well, I was running through New York, Chicago, and LA.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I forget where I am sometimes.
I know. So the point is that when they were talking about their history, one of the guys was assigned to internal affairs, and in cop circles, when you say that there are some people that when they say they're assigned to internal affairs, they say it like sheepishly.
Yeah.
Because they fear the animosity of of the crowd, right? And I said, don't ever do that.
Yeah.
Be proud. You know what? You have the most important job on the police department. You are setting the standards by which everybody has to comply, and without doing that, then our authority is nothing. It's meaningless.
Yeah.
So really important to me, and I know it is to you too.
Yeah. And I wasn't a fan of going there, but once I got there, I realized just how important it was when I started seeing those cases. Leadership.
Leadership, sure.
Another thing that Charlie and I have in common is that we both worked for a guy named Bill Bratton.
And somehow he had the failing of insight to select both of us for important positions, which was amazing because I saw him make many good decisions.
And he screwed these two.
And he screwed these two up. But I know that just like you, he picked us both out of the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, he
And I don't know whether to thank you, Bill, or not, but you're a great leader.
Yeah. And he, different people have different skill sets. And, I studied leadership. I've read so many books about great leaders, whether it's, believe it or not, like Stonewall Jackson, who was crazy as a bedbug, or Chesty Puller, who was my dad's battalion commander.
Yeah, that's a great story. Tell that story.
And one of my favorite stories about leadership is Puller's walking across Camp Pendleton during World War II, and he sees this young lieutenant getting saluted over and over again by a private. And Puller, being himself, walks up and says, Lieutenant, what's going on here? And the lieutenant snaps to attention, gives him a salute, and he says, Colonel, sir, this private didn't give me a salute, so I'm making him salute me 100 times to learn his lesson. And Puller, without missing a beat, says, and of course you realize, Lieutenant, every salute has to be returned by military code. And he made the lieutenant stand there and salute the private 100 times. And that's, I first learned about leadership from my dad, talking about guys like John Basilone, who was his platoon sergeant, got the Medal of Honor on Guadalcanal, and Chesty Puller, who got 5 Navy Crosses. And, team, right? Every Marine is a rifleman. And those are the types of things that I grew up with. It probably would have been easier to go into the Marine Corps than get raised by my dad, quite frankly.
Well, at least there was a break.
But the things that he taught us are still with us today, that they're just imbued in us, and you can't take them out. And one of the things that I think we should discuss a little bit is leadership styles, what you learned about leadership, how you learned it, and then how you applied it to the different things that you were doing. I know that we did a lot of the same stuff. And one of my favorite things to do in the world is go on patrol.
Yeah.
And I would be on patrol every Friday or Saturday night here in Chicago. I'd go out and I'd tour the city doing police work with the police officers. And those conversations that you have on street corners in Englewood at 4 o'clock in the morning after a car stop are so valuable, you can't even put a price on it because they're shocked to see you in the first place.
Sure, of course.
And then when they realize that what you're doing is the police work, you're not there to supervise. Leadership is come with me, not go do that, right? And if you're not in the field, you can't get that done.
And so one of the things when I became chief in Los Angeles has 21 patrol divisions and 4 traffic divisions. And so, I made it one of my goals in the first couple of years was to go to every division and work with a patrol car, in that division. And I'd worked a lot of the divisions before, but I hadn't worked all of them. Nobody could do that. Not enough time in your life. But I went to each division. I would go usually on a Friday or Saturday night or a holiday so I could give somebody a day off.
Wow.
And then we would come in unannounced because I like it that way.
Right.
You don't want to. One of the things you do when you're doing that is it isn't so much you're checking up on the police officers. You're absolutely not doing that, but you are kind of checking up on their boss.
Yeah.
I want to see
Without a doubt.
what's your station look like.
I'm not doing the boss's job. The boss is doing his own job.
That's right. That's right. I want to make sure that you have the right captains, because the captains in LAPD, I mean, they literally run those stations, and they are the chief of police for that
Yeah.
neighborhood. They have every resource.
Same in New York, and that's what we were doing here.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do here. We'll get to that, but the point being is that you, especially in our profession, there's nothing more that says cop more than riding in that car together.
Yeah.
Especially in American policing. I mean, that's what we do. Now, I did work footbeats some, but and walking a footbeat is another good way to talk to people, and I would do that, especially when I in divisions that had footbeats in LA, which aren't a lot. But
Yeah.
but I would walk a footbeat with them because I love doing that. But riding in that car, having those conversations that are about work, but they're not.
Yeah.
They're about your family. They're about what you value. All those things. It breaks down barriers that you can never break down between a chief and a patrol officer in any other way. There's no other way to do it.
My favorite time I did that was on New Year's Eve, which around here we have recreational gunfire.
Yes, it's
And,
in LA also.
If you can't get a gun on New Year's Eve, you're not looking. And I worked with a couple of police officers, and they were hustling. Don't get me wrong, they were running in place to place. But at the end of the night, it's like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I said, pull that car over. Pull the car over. I see the shoulder dip. Right. Take the guy out of the car. Get the gun. Give it to him. I said, all right, I'm going home now. You guys get it.
Yeah, you finally got one.
But I can connect all of this. I'm going to connect Bill Bratton, New York and Chicago and guns and patrol with one story. When Bill was going back to policing in New York, he had been the police commissioner in New York. He was commissioner in Boston. He was the chief of police in LA. and now he's going back to New York. So he calls me, he says, Garry, I'm going to be in Chicago next week. Can you make some time on Saturday and just, let's have a conversation about what's been going on? I said, sure, of course. So Jimmy O'Neill is his chief of staff
Right.
at the time. And
Later to be commissioner.
yeah, but Jimmy and I knew each other coming up through the ranks, and Jimmy's a great guy. And Jimmy comes out on Friday. So I call him, I said, what are you doing? He says, nothing. I said, well, I'm going on patrol. You want to come? He said, yeah, of course I do. So we go to 35th Street. We get him a vest. He's already got his gun because we could carry back then, back and forth. And we go on patrol. And we're not out of headquarters 5 minutes, and there's a shots fired call, probably about 5 blocks away from where we were. And we get to the scene. We're the first car on the scene, and you could smell the paraffin in the air. And there's actually some smoke. And naturally, it's silent, right? And everybody's walking around doing nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking the other way.
And we turned into an alleyway, and next thing you know, 4 kids take off in 2 different directions. And my driver grabs one, and Jimmy O'Neill and I hop out of the car, and we're in a foot pursuit. Now, as you mentioned, I used to be an athlete, but this foot pursuit went kind of like this.
Well,
The cavalry came.
I will say that you're a little aged out to be chasing young kids in the street.
No doubt.
And plus you were wearing all, you're carrying all that baggage.
There you go. Which baggage? Up here or?
Yeah, both of them.
Okay.
Both of them.
So the short story is the cavalry comes. We catch 4 guys, 2 guns, and the lieutenant who's cleaning up the scene, I said to him, listen, put me on paper. He says, really? I said, yeah, put me on paper, because I can articulate what I saw, why we did this, and how we got the guns. It's like, okay, give me your button, which is your number. I give it to him. He says, okay, what about your driver? I said, yeah, put him on paper too. So he gets his button. He says, well, what about the guy from New York? I said, no, he wasn't here. And lo and behold, Jimmy goes on to become the police commissioner in New York City. But my favorite part of the story was there's a police officer standing off to the side as we're wrapping things up. And I could tell he wants to say something to me. And I said, you okay? He's like, yeah. I said, what's going on? He says, boss, can I speak frankly? I said, of course. He says, what the hell are you doing? You're a superintendent of police. I said, no, I'm a police officer. And I swear when people ask me today, what do I do for a living? I'm a police officer.
That's all I ever say.
Yeah. And, the thing that the LAPD does really correctly is there's one uniform.
One uniform.
One uniform
I really
from police officer to chief.
I toyed with the idea here when I came to Chicago to be the interim superintendent. It kind of rubbed against my upbringing to wear a white shirt, right?
Yeah.
When everybody else was wearing blue shirts. But then I came to the decision, well, that I'm just the interim. You know what? I'll just remain. I'll just take the job as a civilian. I've always been, even after I retired, I stayed a reserve officer in LA, so I had police officer authority from California. So bottom line is that I didn't go through with it, but I really was tempted not to wear the white shirt.
Well, I understand that, and I respect it. I didn't come through an agency that did that, but like I said, I think it's very, very cool.
Yeah.
Because, it's those men and women on patrol, in the cars, doing the investigations, working narcotics, all of those, the troops are more important than anything. And again, in the Marine Corps,
One uniform.
the enlisted men eat before the officers.
Yes.
In the chow line. And that's the way it should be. And by the way, that was Chesty Puller that implemented that, my dad's guy.
Yeah, that's. I think that's really important because even when I was chief, one of the things that I would speak at the graduations, and one of the things that I tell them is, this uniform is our uniform. I wear the same uniform you do. My badge looks exactly like yours does. My gear is exactly the same.
Yeah, I think that's super cool. That's great tradition.
Yeah. Well,
Just like here, the checkerboards. Try to take those checkerboards off the hat. Oh my God, you would have a riot.
You'd have a riot. That's
Yeah,
exactly.
because it's part of the culture.
Yeah.
And I love culture like that. Tradition. It's very important.
There were so many things that we talk about the uniform, And it's one of the many ways that you can send a message about the kind of leader and the kind of belief that you have, you know, in your department. I think, and whenever I would see you in uniform, whether it was at a demonstration or whatever, you always looked sharp. You know, you always looked like you cared about what the uniform looked like.
Long sleeve shirt and tie.
Long sleeve shirt.
I didn't
and tie.
own short sleeve shirts. It doesn't get to, well, it does get pretty hot here, but not like Los Angeles hot.
No,
That's like Africa hot.
I did wear short sleeve uniforms, but
That's okay.
But one of the things I would go through is I would talk about same uniform you're wearing. This is my dad's name tag. You
Wow.
know, that brings family in. You know, this badge was passed down from Daryl Gates, which brings the history of the department in. You know, these are the same stars that Bill Bratton had made specifically for him, and that he wore every day he was chief, and I'll wear them every day that I'm chief.
Wow.
On down to the pistol that I carried was the.
Okay, I thought you were going further, thank God.
That's okay. The pistol that I carried was the pistol of Rob Cottle, who was a sergeant major in the Marine Corps and a Los Angeles police sniper in SWAT, who was killed in Afghanistan.
Oh, man.
And at his funeral.
We had a sergeant major, Mike Curtin, who was a good friend of mine, because I got to know him when I was a lieutenant in emergency service. And he died on 9/11. And the Marine Corps sent up their A-team for the burial. I swear it took them a half hour to fold the flag.
Oh yeah.
And every move was unbelievable.
So all those things are important. All those things were important. And you know, I carried this pistol every day. And on my last day, as I walked out of the police building, you know, they have a gauntlet,
walkout.
A walkout. And I told the people in charge of it, I said, have the captain from Metropolitan Division, which is the captain over SWAT, at the end near my car, that I'm getting into, the 64 GTO.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God.
So I drove away.
So California.
California. So right before I got in the GTO, I reached under my shirt, pulled out the 45 1911, handed it, emptied it, handed it butt first to the captain, and said, "This is yours. Thanks for the loan."
Wow, that's wonderful.
And so anyway, so I think those things are really important. And you talk about leadership, and leadership is it's more than what you tell people, it's how you tell them. It's if they believe in you, you know, it isn't so much and they believe in what you say, but do they believe that you have their best interests at heart,
yeah,
and that you would do what you're asking them to do.
Yeah.
And without that, you have no credibility, and without credibility, you cannot be a leader.
I got to tell you something. I just saw something that was really disappointing. A deputy chief in the Chicago Police Department wrote a memo to the patrol division talking about uniform appearance. Now, he wasn't wrong in all the things he said, but the way he said it was unprofessional.
Yeah.
So you're talking about professionalism in an unprofessional fashion. You can't reconcile those two things.
Well, when I was in Chicago, and Chicago has very different uniform standards than LA. LA is, at least especially when I was there, was very strict about uniform appearance.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's obvious.
Yeah, you couldn't have a medal out of place, or you know, there's no leeway.
Right.
This is the uniform, and the reason they call it. So the commander who set the uniform policies in Chicago came in to see me, and he had a list of things they wanted to adjust and change. And he said, and now as to the uniform, I looked at him and says, "Do we have a uniform? Because I haven't seen anything too alike."
Yeah, exactly.
And so.
By the way, that drove me nuts.
Oh, I know. I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did.
Charlie, I want you to tell a story before, make sure we don't run out of time.
Okay.
The Dorner case.
Okay.
Which is one of the most outrageous things I've ever heard in my life.
Sure.
And you lived it
Yeah.
real time and live.
So in 2000.
It's amazing that something like that can happen.
It's crazy. So in 2012, I've been the chief for 4 years now, so I'm pretty much settled in, right? And there is a homicide, a double homicide that gets a lot of coverage in the media that occurs in the city of Irvine, which is about 50 miles outside of Los Angeles, and is literally the safest city in America many years. I mean, they for them to have any homicide, much less a double homicide, much less like this one, which is a young couple who are assassinated in a garage with a 9mm, probably silenced, was just shocking. And then I find out that it is the daughter of LA Police Captain Randy Kwan and her fiance, and so Monica Kwan and her fiance Keith Lawrence were gunned down in Irvine, safest city in America, and I was just stunned. How could that possibly happen? And so, and they lived near me. You know, we both lived on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Actually, Monica went to school with my kids in high school. And so the mystery deepened and deepened. 2 days later, and it's outside of my jurisdiction, right? 2 days later, one of my senior detectives from Raleigh Homicide come to my office and said, "Chief, we have to talk to you. There's a manifesto online. It's written by a Los Angeles police officer that we fired several years ago. He is claiming responsibility for that double murder that occurred in Irvine, and he is threatening in this manifesto to carry out a reign of terror on police officers in Southern California, specifically the Los Angeles Police Department, and he names a lot of people, including you, who he will make suffer like he has made the Kwan suffer." And you know, he explains in his manifesto that he was so upset over his firing that he blamed Randy Kwan, who was the captain who represented him at his Board of Rights, which is a military type tribunal where he was fired, and he blamed Randy for not adequately representing him. So immediately, you know, I mean, this is something that nobody's prepared for. So trying to figure out what to do. Trying to get we get conference calls with Irvine, you know, verify the information, start doing a background on who this Christopher Dorner is, who's the person that wrote the manifesto, where he is, and try to figure out who is on his hit list. He's already demonstrated that he would kill because of this, and I'm trying to stop that from happening again. And then, so get protection details launched to the people that are under threat, including my family, who was specifically threatened, and start seeing what we can do to hunt for Dorner. So that happens. We start launching these protection details all over Southern California because, unlike Chicago, there's no resident requirement for LA police officers. They can live anywhere, basically in the adjoining counties of LA or adjoining counties. And so we have literally cops running all over the region to put in protection details on these folks. And we notified the local agencies as much as we could, but really nobody has the resources to do this except for us, right? And nobody has the skin in the game like we do either, for that matter. So that begins, almost immediately we have a Dorner sighting by two officers that are about almost 100 miles outside of Los Angeles en route to a protection detail. They get in a gunfight with him. One of them is wounded. He uses automatic weapons to disable, using an AR-15 with a suppressor to disable their police car so that they can't pursue him. He flees the scene and within minutes commits a murder of two police officers that are stopped at a light from Riverside, California, just beginning their shift. He gets out of his car, they're stopped at the opposing tri-light signal. He stopped at this tri-light signal facing them. It's midnight. He doesn't negate and doesn't make any verbal warning. Doesn't do anything except for get out of his car and empty several AR-15 magazines into their car. He flees that scene and is pursued by all the police resources in California, but we're unable to locate him after that. Right? Find his car burned out in the San Bernardino Mountains where he had fled. We joined forces with the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department in trying to find him. Eventually, this leads to a shootout where he's cornered in a cabin in a rental cabin that was vacant that he broke into, and a San Bernardino County Sheriff, Michael Caine, is killed at that time, and the cabin is burned to the ground when less lethal munitions are launched in to drive him out. In the end, he's murdered 4. He has wounded 3. He's held the whole region of Southern California at bay. During the time that we investigated his belongings after he died in the fire, we found that he had my father's address and a list of things that he had to do to disable to get into his house. Talked about killing the dog, things like that. It was a horrible time. It went over 11 days. There are too many details to cover in the short time that we have, except for to say that it showed me just how dark it can get out there.
Yeah.
And I was in fear for my kids' lives, because he'd already showed that he preferred to kill police officers' children to get even with them. I was the chief that sent him to a Border Rights, causing his firing, so he had a lot of animosity towards me. Tough time in my life.
I can imagine. You know what, though? I wouldn't take on a B-29 gunner.
No.
Nor would I take on a World War II U.S. Marine. So it's too bad that your dad didn't have the opportunity to take care of that.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure he would have.
I'm sure he would have if he'd had the opportunity. But it was such a tragic thing. When we talk about, I know for you, 9/11 was the probably the most challenging thing you ever had to deal with, and certainly, that is something that the whole nation understands. But for me, this particular piece was the thing that was the hardest for me personally to deal with.
It doesn't get more personal.
No, it doesn't get more personal than having your family hunted,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And especially when it's just for the uniform you wear.
Yeah.
We talk about people being targeted for the color of their skin, for their profession, for their religion, but I don't think we talk enough about police officers being targeted for who they are.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that I hope for in America is that we're able to start having those discussions as people begin to realize that these are young men and women that are doing a tremendously difficult job under intense scrutiny with expectations that probably no human being can reach.
Charlie, you couldn't have teed this up any better for me. Because
I think that's why you have me here.
Because our next episode is going to have Ella French's mom.
Oh, okay.
Ella French was an officer who got murdered, and her partner, Carlos Yanez, who got shot. And but by the grace of God, he's alive. He got shot in the eye. And I'm doing that on purpose. And I almost wish it was episode 1. But you know what? We're getting it in the queue, and I'm going to make sure that we get those precise thoughts out there. Because as we wrap up, you know, what are the takeaways from today? We learned a few things. I learned a few things. You know, leadership matters, and it's important. Your leadership, and
It is
I
so
gotta,
important.
and I'm going to give a little plug to, you know, I think, and maybe it's because I'm getting old and looking back on things in a certain fashion, but there was a time where you could throw a dart at a board, and that police chief, wherever it hit, could probably take over 95% of the departments in the country and succeed. The people who we had around us, I mean, we learned from a Bill Bratton and some of those folks who went before us, right? And then you had yourself out in Los Angeles, we had Chuck Ramsey in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., Kathy Lanier, Ed Davis, I mean, and the list goes on and on. I mean, these are leaders, not managers.
Right.
And there's a big difference between that. So for me, that's the first takeaway.
And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm so involved with the Leadership Academy that the University of Chicago puts on, because I think our profession is not developing leaders correctly because of the political pressure on police chiefs right now, Lee.
Yes.
You know,
The world has changed from 15 years ago.
It used to be that a police chief could expect, you know, absent malfeasance or illegal activity, to do 5-6 years in the job, you know? And that gives you enough time to make some change, that gives you enough time to have an impact.
And hopefully institutionalize those changes.
And now it is rare for a police chief to do 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, and I really hope that changes, because all those leaders that you mentioned were created by having time in leadership positions.
Yeah.
Because nobody's, you know, you may
You're
be
not born in those
you're not be born to know this, and you don't gain the you know, quote unquote wisdom, which I really think is just suffering through hard knocks. You don't gain the experience that you need to make decisions, right, without having this.
And
so
the way that I describe that is I say there's a maturation process in police executive leadership.
of course.
It's not, as I call it, a game of chutes and ladders,
No.
where depending on who's in, you're either in or you're out. So Charlie, I got to thank you again for being here. This has been a great conversation. I always love your company anyway. Charlie and I
Well, it's going to
got
cost you
along
dinner,
for
you know that, right?
I know. But at the end of the day, I'm sure we agree that being a police officer is probably one of the most noble things that a human being can do with their life. And with that, we're going to close. And I look forward to next week, like I said, when we have a couple of people here who have suffered enormous loss based upon police officers being targeted.
Well, give him my respect and my best wishes.
I certainly will. Again, thank you, Charlie. Thanks for being
Thanks,
here,
Garry.
buddy. I appreciate it.